And just to change over to another issue, Israel has gone on a killing spree and has violated, well, they were violating the ceasefire from jump. They never really believed in the ceasefire. Donald Trump came into office with this quote unquote ceasefire. And I think the details behind it is that they only did this to get the hostages back, but they never really agreed on it. They considered it temporary. And the moment that they got the hostages back, it's like, okay, now we're going to resume because we have other objectives we want to accomplish. And of course, the US is not complaining about it. They're not screaming at Israel about it. They effectively let Israel violate that ceasefire all the way through, with Hamas pointing out, hey, you're not fulfilling the obligations and the terms of this deal. You're not bringing in the humanitarian supplies in the way that you said you were going to do. You are breaking the deal. And Israel not caring one iota. And at this point, opening up a killing spree. I think yesterday they killed more than 400 people. I haven't seen the numbers today, but they effectively resumed killing and murder operations in Gaza. Yeah. Give me your take on this. I mean, this is a betrayal to the Muslim community when Trump looks them in the eye and says, I'm going to end this war. And it resumes a genocide that has been going on for 2 years with the world watching. And I think that's the most jarring part of this. It's not the gas chambers somewhere in Poland that nobody sees because they're in the middle of nowhere. We are on social media watching this day after day after day for 2 years. That is a mind. You know what I mean? Like, it desensitizes you to something that you shouldn't be desensitized to. Give me your take on this, just the entire process that is taking place.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, Jamal, this is part of the reason why I'm skeptical about Trump and Ukraine. I realize these are two different wars, different set of geopolitical considerations and so forth, but his behavior with respect to the Palestinians, the Yemenis, Iran, and so forth is such a warmongering, brutal, dangerous, violent approach that I have deep skepticism about that man's peace credentials in any part of the world. But let me turn specifically to what's happened here. You know, as you mentioned, the Israelis throughout the ceasefire, the so-called ceasefire, were killing Palestinians. They killed well over 100 Palestinians during this period of time. The Israelis also, as you mentioned, were not putting in sufficient humanitarian supplies. They were supposed to let in at least 500 trucks a day. I don't think there was a single day where that happened. You know, Hamas continued pretty much throughout this period to release the hostages it agreed to release, despite these consistent violations. There was one period where the humanitarian aid got so low that Hamas paused the release of hostages, which elicited a massive threat. But at the end of the day, they ended up releasing those hostages. The thing that really caused finally where Hamas said, we're drawing a line, is that on the first day at the end of the first phase, 6 weeks after the ceasefire began, Israel was supposed to start withdrawing from the Philadelphia corridor, which is this 1 kilometer deep, 14 kilometer long strip of land along the Gaza-Egypt border. And this is very important to the Palestinians for, amongst other reasons, the fact that this is the entry point for humanitarian aid from Gaza, and they wanted to have control of that. And so that was the red line. And at that point, they said, we're not going to release any more hostages unless and until you withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor, as you agreed to do. By the way, are you still there, Jamal?
Yes, I just gave you the main screen. I'm sorry. No, you're fine. I just gave you the main screen.
I had some problem with my internet connection. That's why I'm sorry.
No, you're perfectly fine.
So I mean, the extent of, sort of forbearance and, flexibility that the Palestinian militants have shown throughout this period is extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. So Israel comes along and just says, we're not going to withdraw. Whatever we may have agreed to, we're not going to withdraw. They basically tore up the ceasefire agreement entirely that they had been, consistently violating on a smaller scale every single day of the agreement. And Trump's reaction to this just blatantly using the ceasefire agreement as toilet paper was basically to back Israel to the hilt. And what's really remarkable is he did this even after Hamas said, several days ago, it was reported that Hamas was prepared as a goodwill gesture to release the one living prisoner of war who's Israeli American and the bodies of 4 other Israeli Americans who died while they were in captivity. And Trump just said, no, you're making unrealistic or impracticable demands in exchange for that, without telling us exactly what those demands were. But I'm sure that the real sticking point was Hamas was telling them privately, Israel has to stick with its agreement to withdraw from the Gaza Strip, including the Philadelphia corridor. That's what Trump is calling impracticable. So at the end of the day, there is absolutely no indication, zero indication, that Trump, his administration, is serious about bringing this massacre, this genocide to an end. Yesterday was the biggest one-day death toll since the genocide began. That's how horrific a day it was. And Al Jazeera is reporting that they continue to kill people throughout the night. I think another 27 people in Gaza were killed throughout the night. And at the same time as this horror show was revived, Trump began to bomb relentlessly Yemen. And the most amazing thing about that story is that the Yemenis hadn't even resumed attacks on Red Sea shipping. What they said was, if you don't resume the provision of humanitarian aid to the people of Palestine, we will resume the attacks. But they actually hadn't done it yet. They gave the Israelis an opportunity to do what they are required by international humanitarian law to do, which is to allow that humanitarian aid in. This isn't a concession by Israel. Israel has an obligation under international law to provide that aid as the occupying power. So all the Yemenis said was, if you continue to violate your obligations, and not just under international law, but under your ceasefire agreement, then we're going to resume the attacks. They didn't do it. They hadn't done it yet. And what does Trump do? He starts slaughtering Yemeni children. He starts slaughtering Yemeni women. I mean, this man doesn't have a peaceful bone in his body. That's what I see, Jamal. So, I'm deeply skeptical about his seriousness about pursuing peace in any part of the world as a result of that.
That's the rub, right? Like, the Yemen situation is solved by the Israel situation. They're directly related. And, Hamas has said over and over that they want a deal. It's just Israel never fulfills and lives up to the obligations of the deal. What do you think that they're trying to get out of this from the standpoint of Israel? Is this, they're looking at it as, all right, we have a president in that is going to back us whatever we do. We can do anything and he'll back us. This is our chance to take it all. We're going to push these people out or we're going to kill them all. Meaning we're going to make the situation so inhospitable that no life can exist in the areas that we want to effectively take. And believing that Trump will back this in the West Bank and in Gaza. Is that what this is about? Because they don't seem to have any notion of a deal or peace in their lexicon, meaning Israel fundamentally is not on board for any kind of peace negotiations.
I think that's entirely what this is about. This is about the ethnic cleansing of historic Palestine. It has always been the objective. What they did over time was they steadily made life for Palestinians more and more unbearable, hoping that they would eventually just give up and leave. To their great credit, and I think it's one of the most extraordinary feats of collective resistance we have witnessed in our lifetime, is that even today, the Palestinians refuse to leave their land, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank. And they're prepared to die, down to almost the last person, in order to maintain their rightful hold on this land, which is sacred to them. So it got to a point where the Israelis said, well, making life unbearable for them is not working. We're just going to have to wipe them all out. And we have an opportunity to do that now. And over a period of time, with all the crimes they committed, there was never any accountability, never any retribution, no real consequences for Israel as a result of that. So they became increasingly more audacious, increasingly more aggressive and barbaric in the treatment of Palestinians. And all of this is just the inevitable consequence of their historic objective from the very beginning to take all of historic Palestine, and B, the total impunity that they've enjoyed. It was inevitable that it would come to this, which is an out-and-out genocide before the eyes of the world. And I don't think they're going to stop until there's an external power that stops them. It's not, or internal collapse. That's the other possibilities, that they could collapse internally for a whole variety of reasons.
What are those reasons? Because I've heard people make this argument before. I was having a conversation with, what is his name? Dan Kabalik. And he made that argument. He said, look, there are internal contradictions in the way that Israel operates, not to mention this notion of a genocide. You've created such bad will with the rest of the world. but also the number of people that left, this idea of how can it be safe if you're constantly at war? Like, what are those internal contradictions that may end this state? And I want to piggyback on that with, do you think there would be an external factor that would change this on the ground? Because up to this point, I haven't seen it. I've seen a lot of words come out of Arab states. I've seen shaking fists coming out of Turkey as it works with Israel to carve up Syria. So, and I know those are two different questions, but in one sense, what are the internal contradictions? And do you see any other state actor getting involved?
Yeah, I'll answer the second part of your question first because it's the easiest one. I think I don't have any confidence whatsoever, nor should anybody, in the Egyptians or the Turks or the Saudis to come to the aid of the Palestinians. And I don't think that the Iranians are going to go to war, full-blown war with Israel if they can avoid it. I think the way this might play out, however, is that the Israelis and the Americans attack Iran, and then Iran finally brings to bear all of its military power against the Zionist entity, and that will have catastrophic consequences for Israel. And not just for Israel, of course, for the entire region, including the Iranians themselves. But if the Iranians are forced to use the full power of their military by an attack, a joint US-Israeli attack, which may well happen, that could be the external force that finally brings about the destruction of Israel in its current form. Short of that, I think the best hope is that an internal collapse aided by, the resistance, and that there are many stresses right now which are tearing at the fabric of Israeli society and political unity. So you have, for example, this fight that's going on between Netanyahu and the head of Shin Bet. He wants to dismiss the head of Shin Bet. The attorney general has taken the side of Shin Bet, but the minister of justice has taken Netanyahu's side. He's trying to disempower the Supreme Court of Israel from subjecting the laws of Israel to judicial review. You have people within Israel they've come to the realization that even though Israel may seem to have the upper hand in these battles, that Israel cannot really protect them. There's the failures on October 7th, the fact that the Iranians and Hezbollah repeatedly and successfully penetrated Israel's vaunted air defenses. The fact that they haven't destroyed Hamas after all of this time, and it remains a significant fighting force. Israel, the notion that Israel is a sanctuary for the Jewish people, I think, has taken a very severe hit over the last 16 months, and that's caused a lot of people to leave. This is having, very serious detrimental impacts on the economy and affecting the quality of life of Israelis. There are, massive increases in bankruptcies. The credit rating of the country is almost at junk levels. People have not returned to the north of Israel, despite the fact that the attacks of the Islamic resistance in Lebanon have ceased for the time being. So you add all of this up, the economic stresses, the cultural conflicts, the political conflicts. There's a lot of anger about the fact that they have basically destroyed the ceasefire, and now there are, these prisoners of war who will remain in custody of the Palestinian militants. And in fact, Hamas reported, I think yesterday, that one of them was killed in the bombardments that happened. I don't know whether that's true or not, but this type of thing is causing enormous anger in Israel. So this is a small country. I think that Hassan Nasrallah was actually absolutely correct when he said that Israel is weaker than a spider's web. The only thing that sustains it is massive military and economic support from the United States and other Western countries, and that power is on the decline. The United States and Western governments are losing their military dominance, their economic dominance, and ultimately that will have impacts on Israel as well. So I personally remain absolutely convinced, Jamal, that the Palestinian people will have freedom in my lifetime. The horrible aspect to all of this, I've never lost any, I've never lost any belief in that, and it's based, I think, on a cold hard assessment of the facts. What horrifies me and should horrify us all is how many people will have to die before they finally achieve freedom.
Yeah,
and that
getting to the point.
Be a much larger number than what we've seen thus far.
Dimitri, thank you for this, man. I always appreciate these conversations. Thank you for the back and forth. I have asked everybody who deals with geopolitics their point of view on these negotiations because everybody has a different answer. And I'm fascinated by the fact that everybody has a different answer. Like nobody knows what is going on in Trump's mind or even like what is possible because it's been so like backwards for so long in regards to the way that the U.S. and Russia is engaged. And so you got somebody who seems to be, okay, let's try to unravel this. And people are like, okay, is he serious? Trump lies a lot. Yeah, it's fascinating. Dimitri
Yeah.
Lascaris. He is a lawyer, journalist, and activist from Montreal, Quebec. In 2020, he ran for leadership of the Green Party of Canada. Dimitri, where can people find you?
On YouTube, I have a YouTube channel called Reason to Resist, and you can find me on X and Instagram at Dimitri Lascaris.
Very cool. Thank you for this, man. You be safe.
Take care.